Anybody? Anybody? Hi, welcome to the show. Let's see. Walter's here. Bernie. Hi. And then there should be also Exotic. There, we did it. Okay. So this is amazing that we got this together. AlienScientist is here. Walter Bosley, The Secrets of Nimza. Bernie from Crypto Alchemist and Exotic Propulsion, Jeremiah. How are you all doing tonight?
Great.
I'm excited.
Good.
Thank you,
Science.
Walter.
You know what that intro needs? Mastodons. I think they're about to bring those back from the dead.
Five Finger Death Punch. I can't remember the other bands I saw. It was with the big show a few years back. Mastodon is the only one that I'm pretty sure blasted my eardrums out.
Wow, yeah.
we had the seats that were like close to the stage in the front area, and boy, that was the one group that I should have had earplugs in.
I always have earplugs, and people stare at me like I'm this like pretentious jerk, and I can still hear them behind my back snickering. So that's fine, as long as I get that. But
yeah.
So for anyone who doesn't know Walter's long-standing one of the greatest researchers also in the field of ufology. I mean, you've also gotten further into it, deeper back than almost anybody. No one bothers to go beyond the 50s. You're going back to the 1850s, the 1750s. You're looking into Nimza. Maybe you want to introduce a bit more about your research and what you do.
Well, basically, I just started, pulling some threads, logical threads, and I found where there is a thread connecting the mysterious 1850s Sonora Aero Club with the legend of the bell during the Nazi Germany era. And in a few books, Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora, and Origin, the 19th century emergence of the 20th century breakaway civilizations. And I think a little bit in my book, Shimmering Light, I lay it all out, what I've found. And again, it's the threads I pulled to make those connections are a lot more logical than the lore and stories of crash saucers that were reverse engineered being the answer for the bell. The main thing is between material that Stephen Romano, publisher of the great Delshow book, between the material he gave me and my own research, I found the bell, both visually illustrated and described, in Delshow's material that predates 1923, his death, and he was claiming they were using this in the 1850s. So, the bell doesn't come so much from an alien crash vehicle. It comes from good old development that really started with, and you guys will like this, oh my gosh, I can never get his name right. He's kind of the co-father of the science of thermodynamics, and his name has a Q in it, and he's the one that published in 1849 a turbo, not a turbo. I'll have to look it up, but and I'll think of the name sometime during the show. But it looks like the bell was a development of something, the turbine, the something turbine, published in 1849.
Shock Charles, maybe from 1787.
No. It was 1849. I apologize. I'll have to look it up.
Patent from 1849.
Wow.
Yeah, the something turbine, and it's named after this guy. And I'm telling you, the diagram.
Turbine.
The what?
Turbine or
turbine? Turbine. Tomato. However you guys know how to pronounce it properly.
With an E or without the E?
Seems Tartarian related. If a turbine.
It's with an E. It's a turbine. Anyway, the Mac something. It's with a Q. It's a weird name that for some reason
Willard
I can't remember.
Gibbs is the name that comes up online. Willard Gibbs is apparently what the internet thinks is the founder of thermodynamics.
This guy is
it kind of looks like a hat anyway.
Anyway, the diagram that I found that was published in 1849 is virtually identical to what Delshow claimed they were using in the 1850s.
So who's Delshow again? Because Delshow had the Sonora Air Club, or what is his background?
Charles Delshow was a German immigrant who was sponsored. His immigration was kind of sponsored by this German-based group called Nimza, And he, according to his own story, was sent to California to observe and report on the Sonora Aero Club, this group of also German immigrants who were, according to Delschow, developing and successfully test flying, kind of proof of concept, right, prototype stuff, flying machines that were not hot air balloons. They were not dirigibles. They were these devices, as you see on the screen, that used what we would call anti-gravity, whether that's technically exactly correct or not.
But something might mitigate our idea of what this is, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the colors of these, I believe, like in those pictures, actually depict different fields, like positive, negative, and a third force almost. That they're encoding within these.
Yeah, you know what they really remind me of is Louis Roda in 1915, and there's an article on this pretty decent one on Rex Research. He had this other little club that he was building these craft with, and he called it the Aero. It was a RF powered, steel framed, dirigible shaped type of craft, but it was not a dirigible. I mean, it was actually made of like you consider like rebar, making a framework of rebar, and extremely heavy, you know, big wheels and all that stuff. A couple of air props to move it around, but I guess this thing would levitate on its own. It used principles that are extremely similar to some of the real craft and Alexei Cherikov's adaptation with the Graviflyer. Basically, uses the same field distribution. There is a diagram for his device too. It's all solid state, but it uses a differentially charged set of 3 rings, different sizes, and RF power source to pre-ionize. And this thing, apparently, he says, would just sit in the air, lock itself into place, wouldn't be blown around by the wind or anything. It didn't require much power either. And the weight seemed to be almost negligible in the magnetic fields produced around this steel frame device. So a lot of these things really seem to have quite a bit of similarity in terms of the shape and the technology behind Louis Roda's Aero craft.
But also, Walter,
I'm going to pop a link in the chat or in the private chat so we can take a quick look.
Yeah, please send a link. I'd like to see that. I was going to
There
say,
we go.
Walter,
Let's pull this up. Take a look at it.
Isn't it interesting also, though, they're saying that this is an epiphany from aliens, right? But then
Right.
You know, you're finding evidence that this was something that was worked on by guys for
Yeah, I have a video on my Walter Bosley channel YouTube that I did, I think, last summer, which is I think it's titled it has to do with the bell, a discussion about the bell, and I have the guy's name right there in his photo, and I show this turbine, and it just figures that I wouldn't have it easy to pull up, but I'm kind of trying to do a quick look. And
here's the Walter Bosley channel. Where would we find it? Secret Mission Burton or
go into videos and where you're at and scroll down. It would be from about last summer, if I'm not mistaken. Don't go too fast. When you get to the one that it's a discussion on the bell.
Just do a search for Bell.
Issues on the Nazi bell? Yes, was the Glocker
Awesome.
real issues, and it's in there. And just scroll through till you get to the turbine issue. Turbine, sorry. Okay, yeah, somewhere along there, you're gonna. Right back. Go back.
Coming. There you go.
McCorn Ranking, the Ranking turbine. Thank you. There it is. I'm not crazy, you guys. I'm not making this up like some of my snarky troll critics like to say. William Ranking.
No, yeah, make sure to look it up. That's awesome.
I have a photo.
That threw me off. The Q threw me off. If it was
in
engine guy, I would have been like Kelvin, Rankin.
In my video, I show the diagram that he published. Like right after his picture, it should be. Right there. There you go. And that, if you look at Delschau's illustrated turbine that the Sonora Aero Club used, it's virtually identical. It's virtually identical.
Let's see if I can find the turbine picture.
Oh, it's in my video too. If you just let it play out, you'll see. I go ahead and this video, I would think more people. Yeah, there it is. See What you've got is, see the thing with the teeth in it? That's that right there. And then here's the reservoir. There's that right there. And then all the stuff that it goes through is essentially that process there.
So this is interesting because we're finding further and further back examples of this technology.
Yeah, this is human technology.
Said like that the Nazis had got it from Victor Schauberger back in like the 20s.
Schauberger was in the mix, but here's the thing: you've got the mysterious Nimza, which Delschau says all this crap about the New York Motor Zephyr Association and all this New York this, New York that. Nimza was not a New York-based organization. Delschau says it was headquartered, based in Germany. And so you've got, think about it. Gee, where did the Nazi German Bell development come from? Golly, I wonder where. Could it be the Germans who were applying that to their flying machines and such?
If you don't mind me asking, what's the history of Nimza? I mean, how far back do they actually go?
Hey, our only source for Nimza, here's the problem with it, is Charles Delschau. Nimza has never appeared anywhere that anyone's ever presented before or since, except in the writings of guys like me and others who have Dennis Crenshaw and Tim Swartz and all the other writers in our times that have been writing about the Sonora Aero Club. Nimza is our original source is Delschau. Now, I've done a lot of analyses and a lot of hypothesizing on it, and I try to do it in an educated way. But honestly, I'm always honest with it. That's our source, Charles Delschau.
Have you found anything in South America or any of the other German colonies that's similar to the Nimza or Sonora Air Club?
Here's the thing. Delschau himself said that any of the groups that did this kind of thing back then were all under the aegis of Nimza. Now, what I have found, when you look at the history of Germany's presence in South America, it goes back to the very last few years of the 18th century, primarily into the 19th century. They were very much colonizing and being involved with mining. Now, if you recall, the Kaiser, when the Prussian states unified, there were 48 of them. When they unified into what we know as the nation of Germany, and of course they went on the gold standard, well, that's one of the big reasons why they were in South America was looking for the gold. All the.
It's
gold
interesting because of the gold standard. We don't think about it, but if anyone had gold, they could call your economy, so they could buy you out if you had tons of gold, right? So the gold standard is great, but also horrible.
Yeah, and exactly. Here's the thing: you're dealing with. You got to know about some of the murkier parts of the German unification history. There were the nationalists who were behind the push of unifying all the Prussian states into a single Germany. Okay,
because there wasn't a Germany at that point, right?
That's right. It was their vision. Now you can trace what we in modern times call, the Prussian nationalists. You can trace them back to the medieval Junkers. Okay, and the medieval Junkers, this class of merchants, kind of the first corporate villains, really. What they started doing around the Prussian states was going in and through duplicitous activities, taking the lesson right out of Machiavelli's Prince, right? They would go in and they would ingratiate themselves with a target culture or state. Okay, and they would build that state up, and then they would start ingratiating themselves with that state's enemy. Okay, and then they would cause a conflict between the two. Their claws would sink deeper into the original state while they were helping the enemy state overcome them. And then once that original host state was, destroyed, they would jump ship to the adversary and then do the same thing. And they did that from medieval era on up to the unification of the mid-19th century. And then where it really gets scary for us is, thanks to Halmer Schacht, beginning, I think, in the Between Wars era, Nazi Germany started doing the same thing. And that's why I argue the United States was unfortunately successfully invaded and taken over by this Junker / Prussian nationalist / fascist Nazi culture organization through Operation Paperclip. In other words, they did the classic thing that I just described, but they did it to the United States, right? Germany was going to lose the war. Their home nation was going to lose the war. So they saw an opportunity to get their clutches into us through Operation Paperclip, building our military industrial complex, and they've done the same exact thing. that the medieval Junkers were doing. They've done it to us. They were doing this in South America, too. It was, the idea was to transport your industry to a foreign land and then take over that foreign land by what you bring to them. And that's the exact model of operation of our military-industrial complex.
Right, and for Americans who haven't figured out what Operation Paperclip is, right, that they took Nazi scientists, put paperclips on the documents so they could bring them here, and then Walt Disney made the Werner von Braun video.
It was also like espionage and like Secret Service people and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. But you know what was primarily driving Operation Paperclip? People think it was the rockets and the bomb. No. When you look at the history of Operation Paperclip, which is included in that book you just showed the title of, aviation medicine scientists were behind Operation Paperclip. Ours wanted the Luftwaffes because all these guys, Colonel Harry Armstrong, Otis Benson, all these American aviation medical scientists, they knew all the German aviation medical scientists dating back to the 1920s. And this was the generation who, dating back to the 20s, they had always dreamed of putting man in space. Okay, so our aviation medicine scientists at the end of the war said we need to keep pursuing this goal of putting man in space. So it was dreamed up by those guys, and they're the ones who came up with it. And the primary motive was to get the aviation medicine scientists. Why? Right? Life support, putting man in space. A lot of people think that the goal was, well, we want high-altitude bombers, and that was why they... No. High-altitude bombers, okay, being able to build high-altitude bombers and put crews on those, that always was, and there, Hubertus Strughold, there you go, there's a main one. That was always a goal, okay, in the desire, the drive to put man in space. You have Otis Benson, who was, kind of one of the right-hand men of Colonel Harry Armstrong, making all this happen. What does he become? He becomes commander of the Aerospace Medicine Division of the United States Air Force in the 1950s. During the 1950s, the U.S. Air Force is developing manned spaceflight, and they're the ones who originally have Mercury. They developed the capsule and all of that. They developed the life support system, the pressure suits, the whole thing. And then it's all handed to NASA in October of 1958 when NASA stood up. And we're told, it was just all civilian and public after that. So everything about Operation Paperclip originated with the pursuit of going into outer space. Now, think about that within context of what I'm telling you.
Right.
This ties into anti-gravity research in the mid-19th century.
And the 16th century. That's what's getting crazier when you see that there's something that, so at the same time, 16th, 17th, 18th century, that you're people still obsessed with magic, right? And they're talking about magic realms in space. And space contact is starting to emerge as the next realization of that idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was all tied to the space race. And von Braun was brought in because rockets will give us missile weapons, but also will launch us into space under the rocket model of things. And of course, the whatever bomb scientists we got, that was for obvious reasons too. But
do you know if Walter, do you know if Jack Parsons had any in contact with the Sonora Air Club, or if that they're connected at all?
Well, remember, the Sonora Aero Club, we are told by Delschow, disbanded in the not long after he began his contact with them, because, according to Delschow, Nimza sent from Germany an individual that he only identified as that Prussian officer. The German members of the club living in California hated this guy. This guy came from Germany and said, the organization loves your progress, but we want you to make these for use in war. And the Sonora Aero Club Germans said, no, we're not developing this for war machines. And there was a bit of tension. And then Delschow tells us not long after that, Peter Menace, the leader of the Sonora Aero Club, dies tragically in a fiery explosion while testing one of his flying machines. Now,
interesting.
Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But shortly after that, that pretty much the club fell apart, disbanded. But we interestingly have a guy named Solomon Andrews, who in 1863 or 4 had been contacting President Lincoln saying, I have this flying machine. Lincoln responded, invited him to D.C., told Edwin Stanton, his Secretary of War, to have his representatives observe a demonstration of the Solomon Andrews craft. And the newspapers at the time reported it, and there were reporters and other witnesses of this controlled flight thing, okay? And this was, of course, in the decade after the Sonora Aero Club, so I've often wondered, and I've been looking, haven't found it yet, for a direct contact connection between Solomon Andrews and the Sonora Aero Club. But remember, Delschau tells us there were other groups around the United States who were also developing flying machines under the aegis of Nimza at the time of the Sonora Aero Club. So Solomon Andrews, in my opinion, has some connection. Of course, in one of my books, Secret Missions 3, Destination Carcosa, I lay out what I think might have been America's first black project, in that history tells us Solomon Andrews was told, no, we're in the middle of a war, blah, blah, blah. What I propose is that by the war's end, maybe the United States had decided to secretly develop Solomon Andrews technology, because when you look at the technology as described by Delschau with the Sonora Aero Club in the 1850s, when you look at what Solomon Andrews demonstrated, and then 30 years later, after Solomon Andrews, you have the 1890s airship mystery, and boy, oh boy, does it interestingly have some of the same technology as Delschau described was going on in the 1850s. And the big smoking gun is a guy named Colonel Samuel Tillman. Is in the 1890s. He allegedly identifies himself to one of the airship witnesses. Samuel Tillman, he was a U.S. Army officer. He was a scientist, okay? He studied thermodynamics, chemistry, all the kind of stuff that, for obvious reasons, an airship would be interesting, particularly an alchemical airship. And this guy is allegedly one of the airship pilots witnessed in the late 1890s. And here's what I argue. I argue that the 1890s mystery airships were very possibly I'm very confident in saying that they are the second generation of what the Sonora Aero Club and Solomon Andrews were doing. I go further by saying I think what they were was a secret U.S. Army project.
Wow. And it's interesting because we did a study on the Civil War, the Confederacy. Sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to point out that this would imply that they had secret chemistry knowledge, because like Mercury, the superconductivity and the supercooling and that kind of stuff wasn't really invented until like the turn of the century, 1911. As
well, there were in the 16th.
We are told.
The 16th, 17th century, you had novelty gas exploration, so lots of people were discovering novelty gases.
Do you think it was plasma?
Yeah, they were super cool and other stuff. What was liquid
nitrogen style, or what type of?
It is. Okay, so Bernie, it was a plasmatic effect, and the reason why it's plasma. Anytime you use mercury in a low pressure environment, you're going to end up with plasma, regardless. Even in atmospheric conditions, you end up with plasma. It's just so surface bound. And right at that point between where the liquid mercury hits the atmosphere or other medium, there's still plasma there. It's just generally really constrained. But in a vacuum environment, you get to see it. I got it on Jeremy's show. I mentioned this idea of producing light with mercury stirring around in a low-pressure vessel, but it turns out it's actually called barometric light. I didn't remember the term. And so I posted in the private chat a link to barometric light on Wiki. And we can take a look at this very old phenomena going all the way back to 1675. First possibility of electric lighting. And so what they would do is they'd build a barometer out of mercury, and when they would tip it upside down, making sure that the mercury didn't escape during the tip, it would start to try to fall down because mercury is very heavy and it would pull a vacuum in the closed vessel, and as it bounced around back and forth, it would produce this light. And if it was agitated after it stabilized, it would produce a light in a totally dark room. And this tells us mercury is naturally ionic, and that it's releasing both mercury vapor, even in a vacuum vessel with no heating, and it's producing plenty of voltage for ionization of nitrogen gas molecules, producing the characteristic blue and purple glow of mercury in low-pressure environments. So anytime you move mercury, It can accelerate mercury if you push it through a tube with a pump. If you turn it into a vapor and phase transition it back into a liquid again, you're going to get huge plasmatic ionic effects. And all you need to do to direct those effects is one of two things. You can follow T.T. Brown's mechanism using magnets to flow the mercury vapor through a condenser, and during its vaporous state, the natural mercury ions can be collected as electric power. T.T. Brown invented an electric power generator using mercury, and it looks identical in shape and construction to the old mercury boilers that we see in Vimanika Shastra. And the second use is we can use electric fields to redirect mercury ions. And in that case, we can gain acceleration out of those mercury ions and actually get something called a geometrically amplified field, or get the relativistic momentum out of accelerated mercury charged particles, which do not have a symmetric acceleration curve because they're not symmetrically charged.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned Brown. I just want to throw in here that since I revealed Colonel Samuel Tillman's role in this, you know, airship mystery stuff, and what I think, I mean, he's in the data there. He's in the reports and stuff. But since I've talked about him and presented him in connection with this, you know, stuff that I write about, Daniel List has done an excellent series, which in the same series that he talks about T. Townsend Brown, he talks about Colonel Samuel Tillman and reveals a lot more than even I knew about Tillman. And here's their connection. They were both in that group called the Cosmos Club. And so check out Dark Journalist's report on the activities of Colonel Tillman and the Cosmos Club and stuff. That's the same guy that I'm talking about in my books.
What I find interesting is that just simply the acceleration of a medium that is non-uniformly charged, you could use even water, has been successfully proven to create a force in a completely enclosed vessel using non-symmetrical acceleration, and basically producing what we consider a kinetic drive that does not exhaust a propellant whatsoever. And so there are many mechanisms by which we can use a fluid or some kind of fluid medium to produce a force, but the best of which we can use a liquid medium that can phase transition into a gas at just that right energy level and really get some seriously unsymmetrical accelerations out of it and produce a very linear or directional force using the acceleration of that vapor. And so mercury is a perfect candidate because it's extremely heavy and it ionizes easy.
And when you combine that, the mercury vortex stuff, with what Schauberger had developed, which
exactly,
you know.
Yeah, then you have the system for both acceleration on how you're going to accelerate this mercury vapor and recapture it, and you have the mechanism for, based on the old Vimanika Shastra stuff, the monodiagrams and that whole study of accelerated liquids. We have those two together, and we have the pump.
Is
and
that
we
the
have
honeypoo then, when you're essentially adding those two together?
Is it what?
That's super interesting, because I'm like looking this up, trying to debunk it in my head, and I'm noticing, well, if they knew about Michael Faraday's 1923 discovery of using liquefied ammonia to create a cooling, that's when they discovered liquid ammonia cooling.
Well, maybe
they
before
still
that.
use liquid ammonia cooling in the milk plant here for Gerald.
I did want to mention this, Jeremy, which I didn't mention on your show last time you brought that up. We can cool it down to get better superconductive properties in a stationary condition, but we can actually get those same superconductive properties with a heated mercury, which goes to its vapor transition state much easier under heat and produces a greater amount of ions per unit volume at a higher temperature. So actually, it turns out that if the mercury is very hot, it works much better for this process, and we can still get the superconductive properties out of it as long as we can provide the polarization field within the liquid under high heat and pressure.
The thing
And
that
the pressure
connects
does
it
not have to be extreme, by the way.
Well, that the thing that is interesting to me about this. Okay, we looked at the Civil War blimps, and that there might be more going on with that, especially the chemical plants. There were stories about weather modification by the Confederates during the Civil War, and that the Union was trying to create, according to Smithsonian, rain by exploding dynamite in the sky with airships. So the other thing that makes me wonder is what other chemicals were they trying to experiment on to create weather? I mean, this is the time when you have people literally going from town to town trying to make weather with this stuff. Do you think that there's a connection there as well?
Who you asking?
Anybody? I mean, Walter, do you have
Oh,
thoughts?
I wish I had the chemical list memorized.
I find it interesting that what you mentioned here with, the possibly the use of airships and blowing dynamite in the sky and stuff. And I think of Aurora, Texas, which, by the way, which had nothing to do with an ET craft. It was a crash report that was mentioned during the 1890s airship mystery. Clearly an airship. All the people now that swear it was some ET craft, that's because one guy, one farmer standing there saying the burned beyond recognition human body that was reported on the ground after the crash. This one guy said, looks like a spaceman. And so all the ET hypothesis people just go to town on that. And everything else about it says that it was a human run, airship thing. But now I wonder what really caused that crash. Was he one of these guys trying to manipulate the weather and cause the explosion himself?
Also, thoughts on other, so beyond Germany, like Napoleon, because I know you've done some amazing work.
Before we leave Germany, just the Honeyboo 1 and 2. What are your thoughts on that? Like
Honeyboo, complete and utter
bullshit or real?
Bullshit. Yes, thank you. I wasn't sure if I could say BS.
Honeyboo already kind of sounds like
Honeyboo is complete horseshit. The line of crap that comes from came from post-war neo-Nazi sympathetic guys who published articles in Italy. And then it was pushed in the late 90s by a couple of guys who were known shysters. And,
okay, hold up though. Let me just ask a question. Honeyboo, are you saying that the word itself and the lore around it is bullshit, or are you saying that no craft resembling the Honeyboo ever had existed?
I'm saying that the Honeyboo craft that we are told the Nazis developed, this flying saucer thing, is bullshit.
Okay, well, I wish we could get Dan Foster on with good audio.
Good for he had
personally seen one. And I don't mean seen one in the sky, buddy. I mean, well, he was deployed in the United States military. He had a chance to go into a base and take a look at one of these things.
Really?
And it was fucking huge.
Really? Now, let me ask you something. What evidence has he produced for this? I'm hearing pins drop.
I'm not gonna try to back the story with.
No, I know.
I do not have it.
I wonder about anybody that is not dead. If the government
whether or not
doesn't kill you, it's
that this is genuinely true, and he's got other stuff related to anti-gravitics and quite a strange history. So you can choose to say it's.
I love how much of a skeptic Walter is actually. I think being a skeptic, we're like Jeremy's a skeptic. I think being a skeptic is really important.
Come on, basically it's take my word, bro. Is that what is that his precinct?
Oh no, it's not. Okay, he gets nothing out of it. He didn't tell the story until we got deep into it, and I asked him specific questions, and then he said, well, I haven't really said anything about this, but let me tell you something interesting that I seen while I was deployed.
I believe
it was a very fascinating series of events.
Hold on.
And he got nothing for it.
Hey, would that be the OSI handbook to befriend you first and gain your trust?
Hold on. There you go. Hold on. What? Okay.
Let Walter.
Do you really think that? Come on.
I'll wait.
Let Walter. Hold on.
I'll wait. What branch of the service was he in? What was he in? When was he in? What was his job that he's claiming this? That he's, was he Army? What was he?
I will get you all that information. Let me ask him.
You don't off the top of your head. I mean, was he Army Special Forces? Was he?
No, I didn't memorize. I didn't memorize it because that particular story wasn't one of the most
more
grab and dubber was what I really wanted to pay attention to, which is a device basically anybody.
Well, no. Here's the thing. You should have paid attention to those other things, because in that it helps you determine if it's bullshit or not. It's not you. It's not your fault. It would be shame on him.
But also,
Dan is in the chat. He could actually fill this out. So, Dan, would you mind just while you're in the chat already? I mean, can you tell us what
Dan,
year?
tell us
Sorry, Dan, I'm not buying it.
Army. There's Dan right there. 64 Charlie. Army.
I'm with
Army.
you on that.
Okay,
We'll get
What year?
Dan. You can
Yeah,
talk about it.
that's a
what
story for
location?
another day. That's a debate and a story.
Yeah, let's save it for
another
another time.
day.
What I'd like though to wonder is, you got people like what's his name, Bob Lazar. Like, how often do you think the
Bob
government?
Lazar's full of shit too, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
but how?
Yeah, I
I'll
believe
give you
that,
an
but
example.
I
Well, of
believe
course.
We all agree on
I
that.
don't
one.
believe
But
most of the other
how?
yes, but I believe
Hold on,
Dan.
I want to ask my question. How often does the military convince somebody that something is from space when they're showing it to them, that they've got or something, so that they don't know what it is and they sound crazy looking at it? You
It
think
would be
that's possible?
very easy to do. It would be it would be easy for them to do. And, it's just, here's the thing. I'm confident in my position because it's so many times people bring this up, but this guy. And then when you go look at it closer and you ask the questions, it always turns out, it's
And
not
there might
as
be a more
solid.
interesting story there. Exactly. It might be more interesting than what we think happened.
Well,
It might not be the same.
or
good dispositions.
Or
I mean,
it's a
Steve
planted
Campion's
fake
the
story.
most.
I mean, where did he see? Where did Dan see this? Hanabu.
Yeah.
Hey Dan, what was your location when you witnessed this thing? I remember you telling me, but would you mind putting it in?
Yeah, you can pop it up. We'll look at it. I also wanted to ask a question though about Napoleon,
Sure.
just because of the Nimza thing. I think it's connected. I was looking at because you wrote the Napoleon book. It's like that's really interesting, and there's such a. It seems like such a more clear story than it is. You've got people that say Napoleon never existed, and everything in between. So yeah, you've seen it all. I found Napoleon's aerial crown, which was his airship, and it's pretty interesting because it's supposed to be a hydrogen balloon, but the story goes that Jean Coutel was using other kinds of chemistry to build the thing, and the more it looked like something out of Nimza that was maybe more clandestine. I was wondering, do you have thoughts on Napoleon and airships and everything in between?
I'm getting into that in a subsequent volume because my Esoteric Napoleon book is just volume 1, and I'm in the middle of working on volume 2 now, and I will be getting into the exotic things that Napoleon attempted to pursue, probably pursued, would have, that kind of thing. So at this time, no, I got nothing to say about that yet, but it's going to be discussed in a future volume.
Epic. I'm very curious about all of the sorts of other technology that they were using. For instance, like the Moscow fire, if they were using, to set ablaze, because supposedly Moscow had a lot more stone than we realize, and that there was even maybe weather. Like they talk about major exodus out of the former regions of of old Moscow, right? That they've moved Moscow essentially after some weather hazards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
So
when you understand what Napoleon was really interested in and the people he surrounded himself with and various things, the whole story takes on a different angle.
interesting potential lead. I mean, this is 40, 50 years later, but still in the 1867, French immigrant Eugene Dominique Nicolet. There seems to be no Wikipedia article on this guy, but he apparently dissolved ammonia in water to reach a temperature of negative 20 degrees Celsius in a sealed room.
Interesting.
With another guy. So the fact that you said French immigrant, I mean, didn't speak out to me early on, but now that we're talking about Napoleon and the time period, and it kind of stuck out. So I was just figured I'd bring it back up as I didn't mention it before.
Yeah, a big part of my Napoleon series is I'm taking a close look at the various Bonapartists, those who, they were on the side of Napoleon, they supported him, and they also left France after Waterloo.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's interesting looking at how France was essentially conquered, right? Because you've got a Corsican and you've got this new group of Nouveau Riche, and they're kind of pushing out of place like the former Holy Roman Empire oligarchy, it looks like. But then there's all this new technology that's emerging. So it seems like that's something that's underplayed in our study of the Napoleonic War.
And Napoleon is lied about too. It's the standard.
3 feet tall, right? I mean,
he was the average height of most males of his time, in his time, and most of what we are traditionally taught about Napoleon was British bullshit propaganda. And there's even British historians in the last 30, 40 years that are admitting that and telling the more true story about Napoleon Bonaparte. I recommend Andrew Roberts. He's the leading British historian that thinks his anti-Napoleon peers are full of crap.
Interesting. So, but and also the idea of chemists. So we have these European chemists that are all kind of converging in these former countries that don't exist anymore, and there's new countries that are developing. So, what do you think is the goal? You say that they came to the West. Are they trying to build, because Nimza, they were trying to build their own nation? It sounds like Israel. Sounds like a nice thing, right? Or are we missing something here?
Well, no, essentially, Nimza, according to Del Shao, and he is, as I said at the top, he's really the original and only documented source we have of Nimza. And by his description, they would have been very much involved in the Prussian nationalist push towards unification, which was a real thing. These Prussian nationalists, they were the ones driving the unification of Germany. So within the hypothesis that I and others have, this mysterious group Nimza would have been the nationalist arm behind what would have become their military-industrial complex of the unified Germany. That's what I think.
And Coca-Cola and the Black Sun or something. So like even to this day, right? Or is that the idea that there's something that some people that are trying to build this, Antarctica headquarters, New World Order? Or what are they trying to build, the paperclip scientists or whatever?
It was about globalism. It was about really being the dominant group or entity, hand behind things in the world, of course. And the methods they use, I outlined earlier, where they just go in, they ingratiate themselves, and then they get control, and then they are pretty much the destroyers of that which they became the parasite of. And this happened to the United States through Operation Paperclip. They got into our military. They helped create our military-industrial complex. They were very much a hand inside our intelligence community,
do
you think they still are, though, right? Is this still the group?
I think Joseph Farrell, he refers to something called the Nazi International. And basically it is an organization that is, fascist corporate, in its nature. Look at it this way. They were the ones who were behind the rise of what we call Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, as we know it, was really the extreme expression of what hypothetically Nimza appears to have been in the mid-19th century. Okay. And of course, Hitler and Himmler and their buddies took it too far. And once this group, this mysterious Nazi International, as Joseph Farrell calls it, once this group saw that Germany, the nation, was, going to fall under the Allies, they decided, okay, we need to pick our next host to go, be the parasite of. And naturally, they saw the rich potential of the United States at that time, and they took full advantage of it. I would say that I agree with Joseph Farrell and Daniel List and many, many others that their final move in their coup was the JFK assassination.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. In regards to the FBI.gov file that was released saying that Hitler went down to Argentina or whatnot. What is your opinion on that, good sir?
I think I have no problem with the idea that Hitler did not die in the bunker. In fact, I think increasingly more and more people are seeing that, that's very likely. And, the
I want to make a musical about it, and he'll have this little corgi and he'll have a black girlfriend and live in San Bernardino in South Paraguay, There
you go. And,
Mein Kampf too, and then he cries.
Yeah. I have no problem with the Hitler survival idea. He probably very likely did survive World War II. But remember, after the war, by that time, Martin Bormann would have been the one, really running the post-World War II show for a while.
Wow. So also recently, a big thing that's been on the mind of people is ET versus AI, right? And I know this is a thing in the movie, even AI, that It's about, you think aliens, but it's really, this is kind of an evolved artificial intelligence that we mistake as aliens. Is that something that's going on right now? Because we were told that this is first contact season, right? Everyone's supposed to be having first contact, and I've been seeing everyone talking to AI. And is AI somehow connected, do you think?
To
ET, to ET.
I would think that a civilization capable of traversing the stars is capable of the advanced AI like we're seeing, and actually, you could argue that it would make sense for ETs to reveal themselves or introduce themselves to a world like ours through AI. Sure, anything. If you're going to go there, anything's possible. Do I think specifically necessarily that's going on? I think we're doing some amazing things technologically, and a lot of folks who don't, like you guys, watch the development of these things. You're up on the companies and the very down to earth places that are developing this stuff. But the average person, they in some cases are letting their imaginations run away from them. Oh, it must be the ETs. It must be see, this ET hypothesis now is so ingrained into our culture that it's very convenient for anybody that wants to slip something in under that shroud. Oh, it's ET, or the people will think it's ET. And here's the irony. Of course, I think ETs exist, and I think they've been coming to this planet, and I think they still do. That's the irony. It's just that somebody here is using the ET theme to cover up very human technologies that are being developed, and other possibly nefarious activities.
And do you think that some of these groups that we're talking about, like the Black Sun or the Nimza kind of adjacent groups, or the origin groups, that they're in contact with something beyond human?
It's just as possible as our government, being in anybody who has, I think anybody on Earth who's got the capability to have a presence in space has at some point likely encountered who else is up there. Yeah.
And they're just kind of trying to hide it.
Well, think about it. Knowledge is power, and people like to they like to be power brokers. And it's like, hey, we're in touch with this civilization from another world, so we kind of want to play that close to vest and use it for whatever negotiations we can do on the high levels of power brokerage. I think that there are probably some very good reasons why any group in touch with an off-world civilization would keep it to themselves.
I also think about Antarctica and the groups of different states of nations that are allowed to be in Antarctica, and the German territories ended up in Argentina's hands, and Russia still has a big chunk. What do you think about Antarctica? Is there something going on there?
Oh, I do think there's something going on there that they're not telling us about. What it is exactly, it's hard for us to know. Now, here's the thing. I know there's been a bunch of stories about, in the last, the last 10 years or 20 years or whatever, there was a big hole found down there, this underground tunnel, and this team of scientists and commandos went in there, and they found old machinery or giant machinery, and they met these aliens and stuff. Okay. We're hearing it all the time in UFO conspiracy land, right? Well, here's what's interesting. I was told basically the same story in the mid 1990s, okay, by my mentor. And he told me that same thing had happened around 1960. So what I think of that specific narrative is that it's somebody in the intelligence community is using that as ink for the water. In other words, they bandy that out once in a while. Maybe they share it with a few people and they tell them, now you keep this to yourself. This is on the QT, so that when it shows up publicly or shows up where it shouldn't be discussed, they know, well, we shared this narrative with these individuals. One of them must have run his mouth or something, because it's a narrative that just keeps popping up. It's not a new narrative, but it's just new to a lot of people now. But I do think there's something weird going on down there, because look at all the luminaries that visited around that time that they
Right?
were
Like,
visiting.
why is John Kerry going down there? Why
On
is
election night. On election night.
on election
he's
night, and
down there.
why is Kirill, the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church, going down there?
Yeah, he goes down to bless a chapel, around the same time. And Buzz makes that weird comment. There's something horrible, terribly evil down there. It's like, what the hell? So
On Twitter.
naturally, people's imaginations are just going to, run with that. And then, unfortunately, we have the bullshit storytellers in this community who come out and I was a commando and I saw this, that, and the other, and yet, when you ask them to provide something more than their claim.
Well, the Fitbit story was good, right? You remember that? There was a bunch of military guys wearing Fitbits, and it exposed their GPS, and it showed a bunch of people in an underground base and what the base looked like in Antarctica.
True.
So there's stuff coming out.
Yeah, well, but remember, we've had underground bases since the 1950s. Just look at Richard Sauter's research. Through publicly available info, he shows you that the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force started working with building underground facilities back in the 50s. It's no mysterious secret that we've been developing that, and we know very practical and comparatively mundane reasons for why they would do this. So why not on Antarctica? Because think about it. You go underground in Antarctica, you're removing yourself from the harsh conditions on the surface, right? So an existence of an underground facility shouldn't be grounds alone for backing up the wild stories. It is something to consider, to ponder, but it might be that the wild stories have grown out of a much more mundane reality.
For
and
sure.
I know I'm a party pooper saying that for a lot of people, but come on, folks, we're all adults.
Exactly. And so whereabouts was that Fitbit one? And was it right on the South Pole, or was it just at like McMurdo or somewhere around there? Because Greenland, we know they also have similar ones too. Whatnot. Interesting.
You see that? It's like pretty much in the middle. I mean, that's definitely further forward and out than you're supposed to be. I don't think Mr. Beast got to openly go this far into Antarctica, right?
Well, I have a question. How many of you guys are familiar with who Todd Carmichael is?
Sounds familiar, but
Todd Carmichael is a guy who made his fortune with a coffee company. He also, for a while, held the record for the fastest solo trek across Antarctica. And he was already in his 40s, that guy right there. And I'm wondering, solo trek across Antarctica to the South Pole. I'm wondering which route he took. Off the top of my head, I don't know. So I'm wondering if he went across an area that people are saying, nobody can go across because of all this mysterious stuff, or if he took a very well-trod trail. I don't know. But
I think you have to take a well-trod trail, or
right?
at the very least, they have to tell you where you can go. When Mr. Beast went, for instance, it was a big deal, and he named Mount Shopify because he got to go to the first one to that particular mountain. So Shopify paid him to name it Shopify. But they had to carry out all of their urine. They had to have these bottles for all of their waste and everything. Nothing was left behind, and they had to go exactly where they were supposed to go. They had to have tour people with them. They had to make all these plans for 3 to 5 years. So I think it is pretty much a guided. It's almost as bad as the Soviet Union tours were in the 70s.
Yeah, it's much more controlled than some people think then. Okay, because that makes sense to me. I mean, that is, if I'm not mistaken, that seems like that's singularly the most controlled
place on Earth,
territory on Earth, right? I mean,
there was the New Zealand 901 in 79. This flight that was going through Antarctica, which is one of the reasons they don't let planes fly over Antarctica. I think is because this one hit a mountain or hit a volcano or it just crashed, and then they had to send people to go get everything because they couldn't leave it there because of environmental damage, and it was just horrifying. So that's kind of been the story that's kept people from going back to Antarctica, on top of the fact that if you go, they don't let you, right? Because the militaries of many countries work together to keep everybody out except for themselves.
Right. Well, think about this too. I mean, Antarctica is kind of this pristine environment, a time capsule of ages ago. And so everything that we screw up and leave behind there could affect scientific measurements in the future to understand Earth's frozen history and what's been trapped there since the last epoch when it got frozen over in the first place.
Yeah, like Lake Vostok and them drilling into it and finding different life down there that hadn't been exposed to the air for, I think it was 100,000 or maybe 100 million years, one or the other. I forget what they claim. But that there's massive mountain ranges throughout Antarctica and that the ice sheet gets up to 2 miles high in some spots.
Do you remember the 33rd Antarctic Treaty?
2 miles of water. 2 miles of frozen water is an absolutely insane number. Really? Does it really get that high?
The 33rd Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting was at the UN meeting room, and this is the way that they designed the room to look like Antarctica. So you've got this sort of rim of trees, and you've got Antarctica, and then at the center you have another set of green growing. And so it kind of is symbolic of what we're, this reset or this environmental shift or something, or that there's more already there, that they're saying in Antarctica.
It looks a lot like a interpretive representation of Admiral Byrd's reports.
It does, actually. Yeah, I was thinking what it made me wonder is, what if, because I'm a big believer in the nugget of truth, the nugget of truth approach that, look at the wild story or what appears to be a wow story and consider that, okay, there is some nugget of truth in that. And, maybe, the big secret thing they're studying down there is a spot kind of like a biodomed type controlled area where they've been able to inject their own controlled environment that has warmed it up. So maybe they've pull it out of hibernation, so to speak, and they're maintaining flora that existed 100,000 or more years ago, and it's very sensitive, and they have to be very careful in controlling it. And maybe they are finding. I don't think it's crazy to think that they have actually found ruins or relics of a past civilization. I don't think that's crazy at all.
No, not at all. I mean, there was a time where that land was not frozen over. It was habitable. Why would you not expect to find humans doing what humans always do, building structures, geoforming land, all the stuff that they do? I mean, of course it's going to be left over.
And maybe there is evidence. Maybe there is evidence that there was a technologically advanced, like on our level and beyond, civilization in the past, and maybe something they did with their own technology, monkeying around, doing some crazy Frankenstein Tesla stuff. And that's what caused the cataclysm. And maybe that's the so-called evil that Buzz and others privy to it, was referring to. And the concern is, wow, if we thought atomic bombs were bad, this technology we cannot get out. Because I heard on another show, somebody saying that the Antarctic Treaty is the only treaty that the nations involved have never broken. Now, if that's true, that's really interesting.
Well, you have John Kerry and Krill going down there at similar times, right? Like, what truly is going on down there?
Also, the idea that there's this, the ice sheet, whether it melts or not, I mean, it serves as a pretty great disguise or camouflage. I mean, it's hard
that is a great diagram. I've never seen that before, but what a truly fantastic graphic.
Yeah, I remember they actually had something like this in the
separates half of it, and it looked like that Fitbit part where it was in a major ice crater, so it could be where that ocean goes through the two land masses, and that would be an under ice sheet base that could have been exposed, which right, who knows what they have there.
But I tend to think that there's something startling in regard to human history that has been found there. I do think that.
I also do suspect that, just like have that natural intuition that something's down there, maybe Atlantis or the ruins of it, or prior.
The idea of there being something underground, though, that's also because you've got all these across the world, these discrete underground military bunkers. You've got these huge military.
Sure.
Do you think that they're ever interacting with, some underground other, beings?
If those stories are true and there is somebody under the surface, yeah, I would think that at some point, they've been encountered. There's been some type of contact. In this book here, Shimmering Light, I wrote about my dad's story that he started telling me in 1974. At the same time, I also present the very strong possibility that it could have been a false narrative, given to him to cover something else.
Right.
But he certainly went to his death believing, I could tell psycho-emotionally believing that what he told me was true. And it had to do with encountering some people who were part of an underground civilization. The problem is he was in the U.S. Air Force in the 1950s. The problem with that is he was in the Aerospace Medicine Command, okay, under that division. Aerospace Medicine Command in the U.S. Air Force in the 1950s, of the military branches, they were the most turned on by what they learned from the CIA on MK Ultra. And remember, MK Ultra was all about the false narrative.
Right.
Okay. And so you do the math, and that's why I say my dad might have thought it was true, but it's very possible that it was a false narrative. So I question even his story, but not 100%,
Yeah. There's always something in there.
It's like those memes you see with they say the odds of your little kitty cat, killing you with a Tesla laser or pulling a knife out of the kitchen and killing you in your sleep are very slim, but not entirely zero. And that's the way I handle my dad's story. There's also reasons to argue that some part of it, something about what he said, was true. So, for what that's worth.
Right. Oh, so another thought on this, we talked a bit about the idea of AI or something, but really AI, if it is man-made and you got this idea of something in the future that is us, maybe it's not alien. It's something like we are. I mean, so some astronauts have been saying maybe these UFOs are time travelers from the future. Do you think that there's something to this, that we're thinking of alien? It's really just us.
Oh, I have to be honest with you. Where time travel is concerned, it's hard for me to be purely objectively skeptical because I'm so intrigued by the phenomenon of time, and I lean towards some type of movement through or extraordinary experience of the phenomenon of time being real. So I'm a little bit, I guess you could say I'm a little biased in that regard, because at this point in time, I do believe that something like it is possible. I right now, I think that someone figured out how to definitely look through time. I'm so open to time travel that I'm not an objective critic of it.
I'm open to subjectivity here. I mean, some of the thoughts that we've been thinking about, we've had Cynthia Sue Larson talking about AI from the future. So if a computer is on for 100 years and somehow it's able to stay on, the idea that maybe the ion flow can allow it to remember. And so it has sort of a measurement of distance of time because it's able to think about this moment now and that moment in the future, but also interact with itself in the past. If that's able to happen in any way, then even just using our technology to travel for us, we would be able to interact with ourselves.
Yeah, we would be. There is that paradox you see in time travel fiction. Can you really meet your past self if you are you? Wouldn't you just go back in time and be observing all?
Could you have a Zoom call with your past self? Maybe easier.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Or I see. I do have trouble with the encountering yourself thing. I just and I don't know why. It's a me thing. I'm sure other people can say, well, here's how it could be so. That kind of thing. But, my view of time is that it's not just circular, it's spherical. And that somewhere in big picture, that whole idea that everything is happening at once, it's all happening in this sphere. Okay. So, if you can pull yourself off that sphere or go to the center and kind of go land wherever you want on the sphere, you could land in any time period you would want. Now, here's the thing: as you're experiencing time, we experience it sequentially, right? Minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, in a linear fashion. That's our general common experience of time. But that might be when you're on that spherical surface up close, you have to experience it in a linear fashion. But maybe if you pull yourself up off of the sphere or ball of time, that's when you pull yourself out of that linear experience of it, and you just get a bigger picture of how everything's happening all at once, which is a hard thing for our minds to wrap around and explain sufficiently. You kind of have to agree, for sake of discussion, to pretend that this is possible. And I've done those mental exercises, and I've thought about that. I've even come to this personal conclusion that it is possible to travel backward in your own personal life, your own timeline. Okay. And I believe you right now. I'm thinking, I hate to use the word believe, I'm thinking that it's possible when you die, at your point, when your body dies, you reach this point where you can, you have options. And one of the options is to jump back in your own timeline of the life you just lived. Okay. I think there's something about the transposition of numbers involved here. In other words, if you die at 71, you can jump back to your 17-year-old self and relive all those years. Same with if you die at 63, you can jump back to 36. And now the problem with that is when you get to, I think it's the second half of the decades of the life, and it's of your life. And what if you've only lived that life one time? You wouldn't be able to go forward in the jumping fashion. You would have to relive it and then maybe live longer the next time. And you can see,
right? Because
you can see how convoluted it can get. But I have played with the idea and considered that this could be done, what I just described. But I have no evidence or proof for it. I admit when I say something is hypothetical, I don't go out there in the community and say I know this to be true to get a bunch of attention.
Right. No, but it's
on a
interesting
radio
thinking
show.
about time is an interesting idea, especially because, and I think, sorry, Jeremy is saying he's going to have to leave, but Jeremy, it was great to have you, and we hope to do more alien scientist stuff. But the idea of time as a dimension, if we're able to produce.
Sorry, I got to dip out, guys.
No worries. Do you want me to end it on your channel, or
see you later.
going on your channel? We'll probably do another hour here on ours. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and he's gone. All right. Well, we'll leave it for now.
Well, I mean, just the idea of something that can measure time, like we're talking about AI, if we create a system, the way we can use telescopes, radioscopes to see parts of space, see things that we can't see with